Hey, all right. So, what actually happened with Confederation? It happened. Um, Canadian Confederation was more of a deal than it was an ideal. So, people were like, "Okay, we'll join if you do this for us," kind of a thing. Um, and nobody really got everything that they wanted, but it did bring most colonies together. Sir John A. Macdonald, our first prime minister, favored strong national government, limited provincial government. So he wanted like Canada as a whole to mostly be run by the federal government. And then the provincial governments would decide some things, but they wouldn't have the majority of the power. But people who lived outside central Canada were not super stoked to be ruled by central Canada. So anywhere that wasn't like that little part of Ontario and Quebec didn't love this idea. And that sentiment is still found even today sometimes. You'll find BC and Alberta have this whole Western thing, and we feel a little bit alienated by the center of the country. So the maritime provinces had been around for a super long time. And they thought of themselves as mature, independent. They kind of did their own thing for a long time. They had altogether a shared sense of identity. And they just kind of wanted to keep doing their own thing. They had already had responsible government and independent trading partnerships. They had all of these things before anybody else did because they'd been around for so much longer. But on the other hand, so they were trading with the US, but if the US scrapped the duty-free trade that had been happening, so trade between the two places with no taxes, it would be expensive to trade with them. And like I said last time, Britain repealed the Corn Laws, which meant trade from the Maritimes to Britain was a lot less than it had been. Most British North American colonies were facing pretty hard times. There was less trade with the northern states, the loss of British markets. Canada East and Canada West were nearly bankrupt, and their union government wasn't working. At the conferences, so these are the places where people would, from all the different colonies, would come together and try to decide what they were going to do. Representatives came trying to figure out like what the details of a new union would look like. And the big one was in Charlottetown. And another one was in Quebec. So zipping back just a little bit, 1864, the maritime colonies meet just them. And they were thinking about having a maritime union, so just like a country of only the maritime colonies. It was pretty convincing. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland all attended the Quebec Conference in 1864. The conference ended with 72 resolutions and a blueprint to Confederation. So they had 72 things that they were going to do, and this is what Confederation was going to look like. So in the end, although this was kind of started out by the Maritimes just wanting to join together, it kind of became bigger than that. So New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Canada, so that's Canada East and Canada West together, decided to join into one big country. So you notice there, you don't have PEI, you don't have Newfoundland, and BC wasn't even at this conference, I guess. So 1867, the British North America Act was passed, and this was kind of like Canada's constitution. It was passed still by the British Parliament, so Britain was still like making these big decisions. But it put together Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Oops. Full of compromises. So not everybody got everything that they wanted. BC wasn't officially present, but some politicians from BC did attend. And then Canada, like big Canada, decided to buy the Northwest Territories in 1867, just a little bit later. So that's kind of this area. And I will show you, hopefully, sort of a timeline of when people joined. So this is when Rupert's Land and Northwest Territories is what Canada bought. BC joins, PEI joins, Ontario gets bigger, grab some of those Arctic islands, Manitoba gets bigger. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail too. And there we get Yukon. Suddenly Alberta and Saskatchewan, so that's 1905. And then Newfoundland doesn't join actually until 1949. So that's after World War II. And then Nunavut. I remember Nunavut. 1999. Okay, thanks guys for listening.